Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came from the Page. And today, Horror Mayhem is well on its way to having its second week wrap up. I haven't been able to get through as much Gothic literature as I wanted to, mainly because it's raining, and like when it rains, it's like my brain is all like bleh, makes it really hard to like physically read. So I was trying to figure out something to do, and I ended up listening to a collection of Edgar Allan Poe short stories, all read by Christopher Lee. And one of the short stories was The Black Cat. And I feel like maybe I've heard like a variation of this tale. I'm sure I have. I mean, I've seen a number of horror movies and a number of anthology movies, and almost all of those types of movies have Poe as a template for what kind of material they're covering. But the Black Cat in specifically this time around, related to it, it just really was. It hit. It was a impactful story. And I think I own cats, so obviously any violence towards a cat is going to hit hard. But it was just like, it really makes you kind of consider a lot of Poe's work and then a lot of Gothic literature in general, in that most of those are tales about alcoholism and guilt associated with it. Many people think that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the Robert Louis Stevenson book, is based on the fact that Stevenson would go out binge drinking and was an alcoholic and had an alcohol problem, and then when he got home he would like wake up the next morning and be like, whoa, and like not feel like that was who he was. And The Black Cat is a very condensed version of that story, and a more realistic version of that tale. I mean, it Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a classic a tale, and it has a lot of depth to it in that regard. But The Black Cat is also about guilt, and that is something that I don't think anyone does better than Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, he really does nail that level of guilt. I mean, the most famous one is probably The Telltale Heart, but there's instances of that in all of his literature. I mean, I just read Fall of the House of Usher, which was in that collection as well, and that is all about guilt as well. And it's like there's this whole little underlying trait about guilt, and of course with Edgar Allan Poe, he was also had an issue with alcohol. And again, this is a story. The Black Cat is a story all about like he loved his animals, and then he would drink and become like a monster towards them. And it's always fascinating reading these stories and these short stories. He also murders his wife, so that's probably also a very big and bad thing to do. but the tale is very much about like loving things and then slowly growing to hate them because of your own instability as a human being. And in Gothic tales, and something I find in Gothic tales but I never find in life, is that in Gothic tales, like, the guilt is very well defined, and you can look upon that event and be like, yes, murder is bad, hiding the body is bad, cutting out your cat's eye, that's very, very bad. It's very, very clean cut. And I find I am a person who suffers a lot with, anxiety and just generalized guilt about nearly everything. And usually, in my cases, at least from my perspective, maybe you'll watch this and hear my stories and be like, whoa, you're a monster. But I doubt it. But from my cases, it's always guilt that's like a very nebulous and weird thing that like doesn't actually have much logic to it. I'm just trying to assign guiltiness to something. So, for example, again, the reason why The Black Cat specifically by Edgar Allan Poe hit me so hard was the fact that, 2 months ago, I was having a normal time. I was having a few drinks. I was watching a movie, and I was, like, petting my cat during it. And in the movie, somebody, I believe it was like a superhero movie or something, where someone lost control and hurt someone that they cared about accidentally, not meaning to. And I was, like, petting my cat, and I was like, oh, my God, if that ever happened with you guys, like, I would lose my mind. And then, like, I looked at, like, my hand, and, like, there was a whole bunch of cat fur over it, and then the illogic was just up there, and I had suddenly been convinced that I had been, like, the way I was petting the cats was, like, tearing out their fur and like being a terrible owner. And this was a very ridiculous set of like, I would say maybe 15 minutes of me like petting a cat in a very specific way and like being like, oh my goodness, is this hurting you? Is there anything bad happening here? And the cat just being fine with it and absolutely no reaction. Like I was doing these little like kind of like pinchy pets, and then like, you know, if you do a pet like that, cats like are shedding like all the time, so they just like naturally like fur just disappear with cats. And if you've ever had to have a cat and you try to vacuum the house, you will see that cats leave hair everywhere. But for whatever reason, my dumb brain, looking for something to be guilty with, had like just become obsessed with the fact that like this was a thing that I'm doing that's like very bad for the pets. And I must add, literally the cats had no reaction to this. The most that happened was Claude was like sleeping, and I kept like doing little pets to him, and he just like looked at me and like, meow, like leave me alone. And I was like, okay. But it wasn't like he didn't hiss or didn't have like his ears back even. He just went meow. I'm like, it was just like, can you stop that? I'm sleeping. And he didn't get up. He didn't do anything. But like I would have been like, oh my god, I'm the most horrible person alive. I must get away out of my cats, for I'm a terrible person. And then I'd wake up the next morning and then I was still convinced of that. And it was just like, for the next like 2 to 3 weeks, I had this nebulous guilt that had like no real basis towards it. Because like, again, the cats like slept with me that night and were like snuggling and like nothing, they were no different. So like nothing had happened. But my brain was like assigning very like weird nebulous levels of guilt. And I always find that's interesting because like, you know, I read a lot of like horror, and most of horror is always about like a little bit of guilt. Guilt is a big thing in horror, at least from my perspectives. Like tales that really like resonate with me. Thinking of like Stephen Graham Jones, The Only Good Indians. Like there is like the second part of that book is like very much like this person did something horrible that they can't undo, and it's like trying to deal with that. And you like accidentally hurt somebody thinking you were doing something else, and like dealing with like the existential dread of like just existing after that. And like those are like my biggest fears, right? Like that is one of my biggest fears. So I always find it interesting that in Gothic tales, at least the ones that I've encountered, if you know any like nebulous Gothic tales that like more like, you know, go into like, is this like something that is like you could really be guilty about, or are you just like trying to be ridiculous? And I just thought that The Black Cat was a very fascinating story from that regard, because like I'm sitting here like worried about like if I maybe pinched, like the worst case scenario is like I did like a little pinch and like one hair came out. Meanwhile, like if my big cat, like if one of the little kittens like bugs him too much, he'll like do like a little, he'll just bite them to tell them to leave him alone. And in that, he takes out like a huge chunk of hair. So I'm like, and he has no teeth, so like, so cat hair comes out really easily, and like they don't really care. But I was just like obsessed with like just, you know, this scenario. And meanwhile, this guy like cuts out his cat's eye and then hangs his cat. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. If ever there's like a benefit to reading Gothic tales, it's like, oh, I'm worried about things that are very silly, and I did not do anything that like permanently ruined a thing I love. But I do find that, like, you know, that's one of the things that really defines Gothic to me. And Gothic literature is that level of, like, guilt, and this level of obsession, and this level of, like, deconstructing reality in very unique and interesting ways. And I just thought I would make a video on it and talk about how it affected me. It was a very affecting story, if not for, you know, animal violence in general, like, you know, has that level of, you know, hits me hard. Also, like, I'm not a monster. Human violence is also very, like, hard to read sometimes, depending on the person. You know, I watch a lot of slasher films, and those people are normally terrible people, so I don't feel as guilty about that. But you know, animal stuff, like, hits hard. But that level of like being able to be like, oh, doing something silly, and and being sad about it when you wake up, like doing something silly when you're drunk or whatever, and then waking up the next morning being sad about it, compared to being a very, very bad human being when you're drunk and murdering people and like brutalizing your pets and stuff. So I was like, okay, I should be like nicer to myself. And I'm good now, for the most part. Like, I still have days where I'm just like, I'm enjoying petting them, and I'm like, no, you're a bad person. Remember that time? And like, silly things like that. But then, that is why you go to therapy and work through those things. And hopefully you don't get so obsessed with guilt that you end up murdering somebody and putting them in a wall, because that's bad. Don't do that. Anyways, how's your horror mayhem week going? I hope you guys are having better weather than I am, and as such, better spirits than I am, but it hasn't started raining yet, and it seems like today I might be able to actually do some more reading, and get some more of those Cornish Tales of Terror read. I don't think I'm going to get to American Gothic this week, so this probably will be your wrap up for week 2. In that I've been reading some Poe, and then I'm going to finish Cornish Tales of Terror, which is quite good. Anyways, hope you guys are having a good week 2 of Horror Mayhem. Would love to hear what you guys think about how guilt plays into this genre, this classical genre of Gothic horror. If maybe I'm way off base and you think there's something else that's more integral to the case. Anyways, be nice to yourselves and have a good day. Bye.